Hello and welcome to Taking Hugh for Granted, the podcast in which two Hugh Grant enthusiasts watch every single film starring Hugh Grant in the attempt to answer the simple question: is this film taking Hugh for granted? Is this film good on its own, or does it rely on the bumbling Brit for its acclaim? I'm Degree Waite, and I'm joined, as always, by my colleague and fellow Hugh Grant obsessive, Oscar Beardmore Grey. Oscar, how the bloody hell are you doing today, mate?
I'm doing great, Diggs. It's very nice to see your face as always. How are you doing?
I'm good. Like you say, always better to see your face and always good to be talking about Hugh Grant. I feel like in some ways, the last time we spoke, it was a Hugh's News episode, and there was lots of news about Hugh. And but to be fair, today, I mean, it's pretty big news in the sense that we're reviewing one of his films / his TV show, The Regime, from HBO. It finaled on Sunday, this last Sunday. So I guess that's big news. But perhaps a spoiler off the bat, he didn't feature in the finale, or the episode before that, or I think he featured only in the episode before that, episode 4.
Yes, I feel like we've been lied to a little bit.
Yeah, we have. We have. Check the tape.
Yeah, and we were told, I was led to believe, maybe it was by you, but by someone, that he was going to be in at least 3 episodes. But unfortunately, as we'll get into, his character only survives for 1.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we talked about this in our Hughes News episode. We'd watched the first episode by then, and we knew he wasn't going to be in that one. IMDb said, don't worry, lads, episode 3, 4, 5, and 6, Edward Keplinger, aka Hugh Grant, will feature. Anyway, episode 3, I am watching wide-eyed, looking for this guy, and the whole episode goes by. It reminded me of Truffaut. Do you remember when we reviewed Truffaut, the French film that Hugh Grant was rumoured to be in? I watched the whole thing, and it slowly was getting... It's all in French. I watched the whole thing, didn't understand a friggin' word, and I suddenly started to think to myself, is he even in this? And then I looked on IMDb, and it said he was, and I looked on Wikipedia, and it said he wasn't. So then I freaked out. Anyway, long story short, he was right at the end. Said some French, still didn't understand it. I know he said something about a poisson, a fish. But anyway, let's before we get on to his performance in this, let's have a synopsis from Synopsis Simon.
The Regime, created by Will Tracy and released on HBO in 2024. Losing a grip on her country, Chancellor Elena Vernham, played by Kate Winslet, becomes increasingly paranoid and unstable. Turning to an unlikely confidant in volatile, disgraced soldier Herbert Zubak, played by Matthias Schoenaerts, she attempts to diminish the influence of foreign superpowers like China and the US, defeat local rebels, and stave off a lingering political threat from the country's previous chancellor, Edward Keplinger, played by Hugh Grant.
Wonderful stuff there from Synopsis Simon. So, Oscar, you sort of alluded to it there. Let's talk about Hugh Grant in The Regime. What did you think about his character and his portrayal of that character?
I thought his character was quite interesting in some regard. So he is, as you said, Edward Keplinger, who is the former chancellor of this Middle Europe state that Kate Winslet is a dictator of. And so you would somewhat imagine that, like, you know, a country like Russia, that all their previous leaders are also dictators who have been terrible to their people, led the country in an awful way. But Edward Keplinger seems like this kind of like hippie type leader who's sort of who we're led to believe, according to Kate Winslet's character, that he is living this kind of life of what's the word? He's
life of luxury.
Yeah, he's living a life of luxury in the hills somewhere in a massive mansion, but actually he is in the basement of the palace in a cell.
Is that where he was? I didn't realize he was in the basement. I thought he was in some like nondescript prison, but he's in the basement. That's amazing.
I think he's in the basement of the palace.
Wow, that's so cool. Okay, that's way cooler than I realized. That's sick.
But yeah, he sort of, you know, I think it's quite funny because I I feel like with every role that Hugh takes, he's slightly taking the piss out of himself a little bit. And Edward Keplinger is like this kind of Marxist lefty leader who Kate Winslet has had to overthrow. And you can kind of imagine that this is what Hugh would be like as a leader of a autocracy. So he's kind of got like these like glasses on that sort of resemble his role in A Man from U.N.C.L.E. or Operation Fortune. And I sort of imagine that he might be a member of the Wokarati, Diggs.
Yes, the tofu-eating Guardian reading Wokarati. He definitely does dance the wokey cokey. It is great. I mean, the way he's introduced in this. So like you say, we haven't even mentioned it yet. Kate Winslet's sort of right-hand man is a guy called Herbert Zubak. And I won't try and pronounce the actor's name who plays him, but I actually thought, we might even get onto that at some point, I thought the actor who played him, never seen him before, thought he was great. He's sort of been disgraced, he's been thrown down into this prison as well, but there's just this other inmate down there. And so whenever you see the other inmate, he's always like in shadow and, gives, and outside with him also in his little, prison cell, and he's like giving it a wave and all that sort of stuff. And eventually, across this guy's bed, he gets this little book, this little red book, this little Marxist book, written by Edward Keplinger with a little note in it saying, come and meet me in the prison, we can hang out. And every time he sees like this Zubak guy, he keeps being like, have you managed to read my book? And every time he's like, no, I have not read the book. And he's like, right, okay, yeah, quite right, don't read the book, it's all a load of trash anyway. And eventually, spoiler alert, everyone, when Hugh Grant's about to meet his end at the hands of Zubak, and Zubak's like beating him to a pulp, he's like, that's the problem with you bloody working classes, you never read the bloody literature, you don't read the book, we can help you. And it's amazing because Hugh Grant does very much represent the left wing in this, and there is that beautiful thing of like, Kate Winslet, she is a dictatorist right wing, and she is using the working classes for her own needs. And in this, he meets a leftist, Marxist, hippie yuppie who is trying to do exactly the same thing and bend this guy to his will. And at the end of the day, the losers are always the working classes, which maybe is the whole reference or point of this thing. But anyway, I thought that was fun. That was fun that was his role. It's just a shame that it was only an episode long, and we only got to see one episode of it.
Yeah, I mean, were you surprised when he got killed? It's quite a gruesome end, isn't it? I mean, basically, Zubak is, as we talked about in our previous episode, is a kind of unhinged military man who has been disgraced in the army, and he's got this little switch, doesn't he? And when the switch goes, he basically just goes on a rampage and kills people, and he suddenly loses it, doesn't he? With poor Keplinger, and Keplinger kind of like eggs him on a little bit. He's like, "Do your worst," kind of thing, and then basically Hugh is strangled by Zubak. Spoiler alert, sorry guys. It's quite dramatic, but and we see Hugh sort of dead on the floor.
Yeah. And then I'm sort of looking back at the IMDb to be like, well, excuse me, I thought he was going to be in more episodes. Maybe there'll be flashbacks or whatever. And they'd corrected their mistake pretty quickly, and he'd been scrubbed off the rest of the episodes, so they knew what was coming for him.
I mean, I think all we can say is that you can't trust IMDb. We've seen that with I'm Still Here, where we set the record straight and got it deleted off their page. So, yeah, you can't trust it, Diggs.
That's so true. Why did I trust it? Why did I trust it when we had to do that all the episodes about it? We had to write the open letter. So many of you signed it. I think 6 of you signed it. Incredible. Amazing stuff. And yeah, you're so right. We got that changed. I won't trust IMDb ever again, although, to be honest, I use it for every episode of this we've done ever, and I will continue to do it. But I wonder whether there's much else to say about Hugh Grant, because what's fun about this is that he's just constantly mentioned. Edward's name comes up throughout the series, and so when you do finally get to meet him, it's quite fun. But he doesn't really, and this I think suits Hugh quite a lot, he doesn't really ever leave this prison. So I imagine it wouldn't have been much filming. And I don't think there was many lines to learn. And he's sort of, he's in and out for a day. It feels like maybe a day or two.
I mean, is there is there any deeper meaning to Hugh's role in this? Because I think this is interesting in the sense of the entire series that we might talk about a little bit. Is that it's sort of what you see is what you get. There isn't really much to be explored in his role, and there's not really that much to sort of dig deep into of the series. I feel like Hugh is just playing this kind of enemy of the state, and he meets his untimely end, which is very predictable in some ways. Like, you sort of knew that he was going to die the moment he turned up on screen, because he's been put in a bear pit with Zubak, who is just completely unreliable and most likely going to kill someone he comes face to face with.
Yes, Oscar, I feel like that is the potentially the perfect way or sentence to encapsulate this show. What you see is what you get. And if you guys want to, you can listen back to our episode of Hugh's News a few weeks ago, where we reviewed the first episode, and we both agreed. We were like, we're not so sure about this, but there's some questions being asked that we would be interested in the answers to, potentially. I think throughout this, by the end, a lot of the questions are answered, or people are killed too soon that we don't get answers for them. And then answers to those questions, and then there's a few questions that have answers that I don't care about by the end. And if you were looking for some deeper meaning behind it, it's all pretty much just shown to you, which makes me think we should basically say what happens at the end. So if you would like to step away now, if you don't care about, if you don't want to hear any spoilers, but essentially, she's a dictator. She acts like a complete mad cow. Eventually, the rebels. There's a rebellion. The rebels get so crazy that they storm the palace. And actually, I would like to talk to you about the finale and what you thought about it. But long story short, all political rivals of her look like they're going to kill her at one point, and then they're killed off, and then the rebels might get to her, but eventually it's the Americans who reinstate her as Chancellor, and in doing so, she has to have Zubak, who she's now she's having a sexual and romantic relationship with. He's killed as like a fool guy for her, and she seems to sanction this as well. And basically, I think the moral of the story is, Americans still bad. They're also the baddies, and they'll reinstate dictators because that helps them. And dictators can just live on if it suits the Americans. Great. There's no real deeper meaning to it than that, is there?
Not really. Hold on. It was so strange when you did the thumbs down. There was like a what was that?
Oh my god! Look at this. Right. So my computer does this thing. I got a new computer. And wait, what did it? So sometimes now, look, whenever I'm doing anything where I'm on screen,
it's like raining.
It's raining. So if I put 2 thumbs down, it starts raining. If I put 1 thumb up, it does a little thumbs up.
Yeah, it did that, but thumbs down.
It's just ridiculous. People, again, this is a reason to watch the YouTube. Do check this out. Also, the best one I found the other day, because all of these I'm just finding by happenstance. I'll have Zoom meetings with people, like actual people for work, and I count on my thumb, and then I put a thumbs up, and this thumb will come up. And I'm just noticing these, and then so my boss the other day was like, put up a peace sign, or put up 2 peace signs. So I was like, okay, I'll put up 2 peace signs, and then confetti starts coming down, and then it becomes a fun little game. And she was like, try a love heart, and I was like, I don't think a love heart's gonna. Oh my god, love hearts are coming on the screen. Okay, last one.
That's brilliant.
Is the best one. It's so good, isn't it? But the best one is I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, which obviously I wouldn't have mentioned, but obviously because Hugh's in it, it's great. Playing Dungeons and Dragons, and in the Dungeons and Dragons thing, we went, our characters were in this like nightclub, and so I put up the 2 like rocks hand signals, and then lasers came across my screen. So guys, honestly, do check out.
That is amazing.
It's
Presumably
crazy.
you can turn that off if you want to.
I know, but I was like, you know what? It's quite fun. It is
fun.
It's fun, and what I really want to do is I've not looked up the triggers Because I think it's much more fun to just work, just like be sat here, and then one day I'll make some sort of. Because I've tried everything, I really have. I've I've tried so much like stuff, but it's just none of it's working. But we hopefully, But I'm just hoping that eventually I'll discover some more, because I don't want to look up the triggers, because then it might ruin it. Because honestly, when I found out that the rock hand signals sent out lasers.
How about this one?
Oh, hang loose. That's not. What about if I pretend to be on the phone? No. Anyway, listen. Give me other hand signals to try. I also tried okay. That doesn't work, because I think that's meant to be offensive in another country.
Come on, Apple, sort your shit out.
I know, guys. Anyway, where were we? What did you think about the finale?
I felt like it fell quite flat.
Yeah.
I was expecting a coup. I got a coup. I was expecting, I guess in some ways, the one twist that I didn't see coming was that Kate Winslet was reinstated. I thought that she might die.
Yeah.
And the bit where she got trapped in that room with Zubak, they're led astray by some sort of working class drunk,
crazy old man. Yeah.
I thought that was okay, but I mean, I guess the sort of moral of the story is that, if you're a dictator, you always win, and people will bow to you regardless of what happens. And I mean, also like the fear in her eyes when she actually saw what the people actually think of her and the state that people were living in was almost unbelievable for her. So, but yeah, I mean, I've been reading a lot of reviews today and yesterday, and they're not very favorable. Let's just put it that way. It's a 2 out of 5, maybe a 3 out of 5. Most people say that Kate Winslet is a sort of starring light in a satire that just misses the mark. A lot of people said they don't know what the show is trying to satirize, which I think is a fair point, because obviously they're trying to take the piss out of Russia, Ukraine, the kind of tin pot nature of a lot of these states that have a dictator at the moment. But I don't know, with such a great cast and all these great writers, Stephen Frears, Will Tracy from The Succession, you just felt like there was going to be something a bit more. But in the end, we just sort of watched Kate Winslet acting like a maniac for 6 episodes.
Yes, and I think the part of the problem with it is it's like there was such clear like representation things. So like we said, when the old man is like, you reference him being working class and Zubak being working class, like it's a show that's like, you feel like there's lots of characters who are meant to represent certain people. Like, okay, that guy's the private sector, and that guy is a greedy politician, and that guy is the left, and this guy's working class, blah, 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 blah. And ultimately, like you say, I don't know what the message is that we're meant to take from it. Like you said before, a dictator still wins. The Americans use dictators for what they want. That's just a sort of boring end. And all the interesting character stuff that was bubbling under the surface just bubbled off and bubbled away. AKA, Kate Winslet has this relationship with Zubak. And I actually think one of the things the show does really well is it feels like they're going to fuck. The first 2 or 3 episodes, you're like, oh my God, they need to shag. And they never do. And you're like, oh my God, when are they going to do it? And oddly, that was something that really kept me watching. There's suddenly an episode, I think episode 4, he kills Keplinger, and then suddenly it's like, they're shagging. And oddly, maybe it's just me, but because I then became in just way less horny, my interest in the show died. But then you can't tell from then on whether it's a genuine relationship of love. But it makes you think that by the end, because she seemingly happily sanctions his death, even though she keeps his dead body in the basement to go and talk to it at the end, so maybe not. You sort of think, well, have we learned anything? Has this character changed? Not really. So you sort of feel like we end where we started, but that doesn't feel like just like Hugh Grant's last HBO show, The Undoing. It feels like an unsatisfactory ending for viewers. It might be making a clever point, but for a viewer, it's not fun. It's not satisfying.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Diggs, and I think you're right that Zubak and Elena's relationship is about the only interesting thing in this show. It's the only thing that keeps you on the edge of your seat. You're at the beginning, you're confused as to why he's there. Then there's all this sexual tension. Then they eventually, unexpectedly, do get together, and then we're kind of in Zubak's head about like whether or not she actually loves him, or he's just there as a kind of pawn, which we find out that he is, because she kind of does a deal with the Americans to have him killed and her reinstated. I think there's also a terrific point about Hugh's other HBO show, The Undoing. And if we're being totally honest, both this show and The Undoing were quite one-dimensional shows, I feel like. They were both for HBO with its history and all the great shows that it produces. The kind of mini-series thing can be fantastic, but we're not going to see a season 2 of The Regime. Let's be totally real here. And The Undoing was, a bit like this, where like you're sort of engaged, sort of hope, curious about what happened, who's done it, like what's going to happen next. But at the same time, you're sort of like, I feel like it's one of those shows where you watch the first 2 episodes and you're like, this could get good. This could be really good. I'm really interested. And then, ultimately you're watching the 6th episode and you're like, is this going to end now? Like, what, why did I watch 5 episodes of this, apart from obviously for Hugh Grant?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm going to ask you that question when we finish our review, so I'm going to hold that question for then. But I think all I'll say is, though, to be fair, The Regime, both shows were limited shows by design. They said, this is a limited series, we're only doing this series, that sort of thing. So, but it's still, you almost think, well, with that, you can tell such an even more complete and satisfying story within that time, because I think other shows will be thinking, oh, okay, what we want to do is get more series, so maybe we'll leave things on cliffhangers. But oddly, this show and that show leave you feeling unsatisfied. I mean, this show, I think, I don't know actually about more so. Listen to our review of The Undoing and you'll hear more about that. But this show leaves you feeling unsatisfied because, you know what? One of my big problems with it is there's actually not more characters, which I know sounds weird, but I think this suffers from a lack of B-plot, because they're trying to tell all these big political stories, but actually, there's some human stories beneath that they're missing out on, including there's this northern woman who works in the palace, and she's got a son called Oscar or something. Actually, what is the name? She's got a son called
Oscar,
something like that.
But with a K.
Oscar with a K. And basically, I think what happens is Oscar is sort of being pretended to be the Chancellor's son when actually she can't have a child, and so this woman has to tackle and deal with the fact that Oscar is very sick and is being touted as this mad woman's son when it's actually her own son, and she's constantly getting calls from the Americans being like, and trying to get her out. And then, spoiler alert, in episode 5 at the end, she's just shot.
I feel like what happened, Diggs, is that they were planning on having kind of like an extra episode or a story where we see the son escaping, they go off to America, but they ran out of time, so they were just like, all right,
just shoot her in the head. Yeah, exactly. I bet they were filming the rebels storming the palace, and they were like, just for safety, just in case we run out of time, we'll definitely shoot your scenes. Let's just shoot you in the head. Just a quick shot of you being shot in the head, and we'll never return to what happens to you or what happens to your son, most chiefly. And I know that's sort of the horror of it, is it's like, oh God, she's just shot by the rebels and she meant nothing. And like, what happens to her son? We don't know. And isn't that terrible? But actually, for a viewer who watching political satire happen is quite boring, we want to see the human stories. I want to see Kate Winslet and the Zubak guy shag, and I want to see what happens to this poor boy and his very sweet and scared mother. But instead, they're killed, but actually as a viewer, that had no resonance with me. I didn't feel sad, I just felt like pissed off. And that actually also leads to a weird start of the finale, where it's a very boring and linear thing, where it's just following Kate and Zubak running around for a bit, which is a bit boring, until eventually they stop a car, they meet that mad old man, and then it gets interesting. But then it tails off and gets weird at the end.
Taking he for granted, taking he for granted, taking he for granted. What did you think, lads? Were they taking he for granted?
So, Diggs, we've watched 6 episodes of The Regime, and it's time to answer that question once again. Are we taking Hugh for granted?
Oscar, we are taking Hugh for granted, I'm afraid. I don't think that will come as a surprise to people. Unfortunately, this show had some things that could have kept you watching, something that could have kept you interested, but ultimately, this show is exactly what you said. It is what you see. There's no more to it. It does exactly what it says on the tin. And you want something that you're going to go away and think about more, and unfortunately you're not. And you want something you can go, Hugh Grant was great in that. And unfortunately, he's only in an episode. He's underused. That's not always how we rate these things, but he's underused. And Kate Winslet was brilliant. I thought, I want to get his name right, but I don't know what it is. And I thought the man who played Zubak was fantastic as well. But that's not enough to sustain a good program. What did you think?
Diggs, I'm gonna agree with you. We are taking Hugh for granted. I think what you say is spot on, in the sense that he is underutilized, and that's not always a bad thing. We've seen Hugh play many a cameo recently,
yes.
And some of those cameos are great. You know, you don't need to be on screen very long to make an impact. I felt like we kept on hearing about this Keplinger character, and maybe we were given false pretenses about, you know, how much he was going to be involved in the show. But I was left incredibly dissatisfied by his, you know, half an episode on screen. There's a few, I guess, interesting scenes between him and Zubak in this underground basement. We see Hugh getting beaten up, and we see Hugh being killed. And so for that reason, I'm going to have to say we are taking Hugh for granted. The show as well didn't live up to expectations, and it was forgettable.
It was. Shout out to Kate Winslet again. I do think she was a real good thing about this, but ultimately it didn't work. And the question I wanted to ask you, Oscar, was, after watching, let's say 2 episodes, would you have continued watching?
If it wasn't for Hugh?
Yes.
No.
Then that tells you everything you need to know. And yeah, I mean, there's what else can you say?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there was a lot of fanfare around this as well, like adverts everywhere. I heard ads on the radio.
Really?
Yeah. You know, they really pushed it out there. And I had people talking a bit, but I think most people came to the same conclusion who I've spoken to, it was like, it's just a bit crap.
Yeah.
It's weird and crap.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, you know me, Oscar, I love a bit of edge. I don't mind weird, you know, but this was just weird, but empty weird, I think. And you know what? It's interesting that it hasn't made a splash here yet, but I don't think it's properly released here yet. So it's going to be interesting to see if they try and push it a bit more at the moment, but something makes me think it won't. All I'll say is that our leftist rag, The Guardian, has given it 5 stars, or at least it gave the first episode 5 stars. Yeah, I know. Oscar's looking perplexed.
Well,
did they not?
Sorry. No, they did. There was another review that came out about 5 hours, like about 12 hours ago, and they sort of trash it. So
Oh, thank God! Because
Yeah.
basically, I think I'm pretty sure I saw. Well, maybe I'm slandering this. So you can cut this out if I am. But I'm pretty sure there was a review of the first episode by The Guardian, which was 5 stars, and I was like, obviously you love this, you pricks. But anyway, but there we go.
Their most recent review is 3 stars, and the title is The Regime Review. Kate Winslet is wasted in this mess of a satire. So there you go. Even
Thank
the Guardian wokey cokey readers don't like it.
Yeah, quite bloody right. Thank God for that. Well, there we go. We have that. I guess that about sums that up. Unfortunately, that is going. Oh, maybe at some point, maybe for our next Hughes News, we can. We'll have more time to think about it. Not that we will, because we just said it's something that won't stay with us, and maybe we can rank it for our ranking system. But until then, I guess what we need to do is get excited about Heretic, which is currently in post-production.
And Pop-Tart.
And Unfrosted, the Pop-Tart story. Now, all I'll say is that, not that I'm going to believe this for a fucking second, but, oh my God, well, this is too exciting. They now have, for Unfrosted, a Pop-Tart story, a bloody, a poster, and they also have a name for Hugh Grant. Apparently he plays someone called Thurl Ravenscroft.
How do they come up with? Is there a job for people who just make up fake names, like they make character names? Because
but
where the hell?
But you never know, because this is based on Pop-Tarts and morning cakes and stuff. So maybe that there is actually some bloke, and maybe Thurl Ravenscroft is the bloke who came up with Frosties, because obviously Hugh Grant has been pictured as Tony the Tiger, and even on the poster of this, he is in the costume. So,
Yes.
I mean, honestly, anyway, something to look forward to. Something we'll undoubtedly talk about very soon, actually. I think it's going to come out in the next couple of months. So it's all very exciting stuff. Make sure you're following, you subscribe to this wherever you're watching or listening now. And find us on social medias. We're on the charge to 1,000 followers on Instagram. We're at Taking Hugh for Granted there. And on Facebook, at Taking Hugh on Twitter, /X. Lads, we love you so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.